When the Burning Begins by Patricia Smith.
The recipe for hot water cornbread is simple. Cornmeal, hot water. Mix till sluggish, then dollop in a sizzling skillet. When you smell the burning begin, flip it. When you smell the burning begin again, dump it onto a plate. You've got to wait for the burning and get it just right. Before the bread cools down, smear it with sweet salted butter and smash it with your fingers. Crumble it up in a bowl of collard greens or buttermilk. Forget that I'm telling you, it's the first thing I ever cooked, that my daddy was laughing and breathing in no bullet in his head when he taught me. Mix it till it looks like quicksand, he'd say, till it moves like a slow song sounds. We'd sit there in the kitchen in the half dark, licking our fingers and laughing at my mother, who was probably scrubbing something with bleach, or watching Bonanza, or thinking how stupid it was to be burning that nasty old bread in that cast-iron skillet. She always used whole milk and eggs and baked her cornbread until it was plump and sugary. And she'd branded me hopeless as a homemaker, too damn interested in sitting in the kitchen in the half-dark, learning nothing at all from a man who had other women and stayed out late on Saturday nights. When I told her that I had fixed my first ever pan of hot water cornbread and that my daddy had branded it glorious, she sniffed and kept mopping the floor over and over in the same space. So here's how you do it. You take out a bowl, like the one we had with blue flowers and only one crack. You put the cornmeal in it. Then you turn on the hot water and you let it run, where you tell the secret about the boy who kissed your cheek after school, or about how you really want to be a reporter instead of a teacher or a nurse like Mama said. And the water keeps running while Daddy says you will be a wonderful writer, and you're going to be famous someday. And if I wrote you a letter and sent you some money, would you write about me? And he is laughing and breathing, and no bullet in his head. So you let the water run into this mix until it moves like mud moves at the bottom of a river, which is another thing Daddy said. And even though I've never even seen a river, I know exactly what he meant. Then you turn the fire way up under the skillet, and you pour in this mix that moves like mud moves at the bottom of a river, like quicksand, like a slow song sounds. That stuff pops something awful when it first hits that blazing skillet. And sometimes Daddy and I would dance to those angry pop sounds. He'd let me rest my feet on top of his while we waltzed around the kitchen, and my mother huffed and puffed on the other side of the door. When you are famous, Daddy asked me, will you write about dancing in the kitchen with your father? I say everything I write will be about you, that you will be famous too. And we dip and swirl and spin, but then he stops and sniffs the air. The thing you have to remember about hot water cornbread is to wait for the burning, so you know when to flip it. And then again, so you know when it's crusty and done. Then eat it the way we did, with our fingers, our feet still tingling from dancing. But remember that sometimes the burning takes such a long time. And in that time, sometimes, poems are born.
So Patricia Smith is an author and a writer. She was born in Chicago, although I couldn't really find much about her youth. She has written many poems and 6 poetry volumes. The 6 are, one's Blood Dazzler. She talks about the damage of Hurricane Katrina. The second is Should Have Been Jimmy Savannah, and that's poetry about the second wave of the Great Migration. And then the other 4 are Tea House of the Almighty, Close to Death, Big Towns, Big Talk, Life According to Motown. So while looking up things about Patricia Smith, I came across a interview with her, and in it she said that she's not just a poet or a writer, but she uses the best way to express the story that she would like to tell. So she doesn't consider herself to be a poet just a poet or just a writer. She considers herself to be telling stories. And all her poems are something that she needed to get out. She needed to get it out in the open, and that really shows through her poems. So I could not actually find a copy of the poem online, so I just wrote out the poem on Word. And although Patricia Smith in that in the video does say the poem a little differently than what we have down on paper, I thought it was very important to have her read it, because I think the way that she reads it really expresses how this isn't just a poem to her. It's a story. It's her life. It's her family. It's her father. It's something that makes her who she is. So in this poem, I believe that it splits up into stanzas in an ordinary fashion. She doesn't go crazy with anything. Whenever there's a new situation, she changes stanzas. For example, in between this first stanza and this second stanza, the first one talks about it's her father talking, and then the second one she starts talking about her mother, and they split up. They split up at good times. The poem also flows very nicely. The lines flow through each other. It's so easy to read. The enjambments are recognizable and flow nicely, even though there is the pause you think there shouldn't be. But overall, I think it's a very well-written poem. The stanza, I think it flows very nicely. So, to begin, as Patricia Smith explained in the interview that I saw, she's not just writing a poem. She's trying to tell a story. So, in the first stanza, it says, "When you smell the burning begin, flip it. When you smell the burning begin again, dump it on a plate." And I think she's trying to explain the burning feeling that she's had for her father, what that's been going on since her father has shot himself in the head. And then she says, "You've got to wait for the burning and get it just right." So there's going to be some burning in it. There's going to be some hurt or burning with a death. So you just have to wait for it and wait for it to get to the perfect point. And then you know that it's going to eventually sizzle down. So you're at that point where you're not going to forget about them, but it's not going to last forever. Then, on the next stanza, she says, "Forget that I'm telling you it's the first thing I ever cooked, that my daddy was laughing and breathing, and no bullet in his head when he taught me." So I first thought, what could that mean? Why are you forgetting that this was the first time that you're cooking it? Why is that important to you? Why is that part of the story? I'm not really sure, but she's trying to present a story to us, and maybe that's not what she wants us to remember in the story. She wants us to remember the good times she had with her father. And in the second to last line, it says, "No bullet in his head." It's an illusion. It just says without a bullet in his head, without explaining anything. Like, we don't know why he has a bullet in his head. So, yeah. And then a few stanzas down, So when she says, "When I told her that I made my first ever pan of hot water cornbread and that my daddy had branded it glorious, she sniffed and kept mopping the floor over and over in the same place." So this is an interesting part, because is she saying it's in the present where her mother's trying to mop up that the place where her father may have committed suicide. Or maybe it's in the past, during that time when she comes in and shows her mom that she made this hot water cornbread, and maybe her mom was trying to mop up their marriage because it wasn't doing well. So she's obviously presenting her mother trying to clean something up. And also, she's kind of, when her mother sniffs, I think this isn't just about her mother, this is about her whole childhood. She's trying to clean up, she's examining her whole childhood as probably a very rough time since her father committed suicide, and it seems that her parents had a pretty rough time. So then when it says we had the blue flour and only one crack, that is a great example of how she's trying to present this story to us. It's not just saying the recipe or anything like that. This bowl is part of the story. Without it, something like the bowl and only one crack, it would just be a recipe. It wouldn't be her telling the story that she wants to convey. And in the same stanza, when she starts saying, while you tell the story about the boy who kissed your cheek after school, or about how you really want to be a reporter instead of a teacher or nurse like Mama said, she's not just saying, it's not just a recipe to her. This is part of the entire aspect of the whole thing, you know. She's telling us, this is what I did when I was younger, this is what this meant to me. She's telling a story. So it's not just a poem. And then she talks about that blazing skillet, and sometimes Daddy and I would dance to those angry pop songs. He'd let me rest my feet on top of his while we waltzed around the kitchen. And obviously that's not part of the set in stone recipes. And she's telling us something that's very important to her. She's telling us her story within. And I think that's something that's really unique about this poem. And then these two lines here are something that really struck me. He says, and spin, then he stops and sniffs the air. And maybe he could just be stopping to sniff the air. Maybe I'm looking a little too far into it, sniff the air because the cornbread's ready, but maybe her dad stopped and realized his horrible life. Maybe he was standing there after waltzing with his daughter and having a great time. He stopped, sniffed the air, and realized that his life wasn't any different. He was still living in the same horribleness that he was living in 2 seconds ago when he wasn't dancing with his daughter. So then this last stanza, and these lines. Then eat it the way we did, with our fingers, our feet still tingling from dancing. But remember that sometimes the burning takes such a long time, and in that time, sometimes, poems are born. So obviously, in the beginning, she's still telling the story, but then she goes in to say that the burning is about her. It's the burning of her father's death that has lasted so long for her. And in that time, she has told stories in different readings, and finally a poem was born from her pain, and it's a beautiful poem. And then also this section is the denouncement of the poem. It kind of explains the burning and why this poem was written, and it's a really deep part of the poem, and it really sort of shows that this is not just this was a story that she's trying to convey via a poem.